Hi, I'm Don Taylor, Chairman of the Learning and Skills Group.
Make him prove it. See if he has some identification.
I have told Elliot, my guest here today, that I need no introduction to this marvellous audience. I know, Elliot, that you also need no introduction, but I'm going to introduce you anyway. We are joined today by Elliot Masie, one of the great, one of the great figures in our industry. He's the chair of the Learning Consortium, which is a group of 230 global companies, including Google, Disney, Yahoo, Emirates, and also, of course, runs the Masie Center Learning Lab in New York, where people come together for great virtual and physical learning experiences, and of course runs a great learning event where I was lucky enough to be on the main stage back in October in Orlando every year, and I believe it's going to be the 25th year.
It's coming up, and I am with Donald in London today, which is exciting.
And it's exciting. It's great that Elliot has cut into his international travels to join us and be with us today. So I'm not going to hang around much longer. I'm going to get straight into asking Elliot some questions. I've got a bunch of questions written, but you know what? They keep coming through on the iPad and the laptop. We're going to ask one question, and I think then get straight into yours, because we've got some great thoughts coming through here. Elliot, you breaking your journey here in London. You've come from Abu Dhabi. Tomorrow you're off to Paris. Of course, you're based in the States. Very much have a global presence. What are the big trends internationally that you're seeing in learning at the moment?
Well, a couple, and thank you all for hanging out with us and for inviting me here. I'll give you three that I think are really important. Personalization is at the top of my list. I just gave presentations and conversations in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and as you said, I'm going on to Paris, Milan, and then back to the States. And in almost every country, the conversation comes back to personalization.
Right.
In a nutshell, how do I get learning that maps closer to what I need to be tested on, or competency in a style, a place, a format? So personalization is a top one. A second one is compression, which is how do we, the wonderful part is we're only going to do this for 30 minutes. Now, Donald and I can go on for 9 hours.
He can go on for 10 hours.
Yeah, but you don't want us to go on for 9 or 10 hours. But 30 minutes is a good chunk. One might argue 6 minutes would be even better. But we are seeing compression. It doesn't mean the learner is learning less, but the chunks, the bits, are getting a bit more compressed.
And there's an overlap there. Personalization, if you've got what you need, you need less time to cover the stuff that's not directly relevant.
And then the third element is the area of competencies, where we are seeing more and more conversation, not about did they pass the course, did they get the certificate, and that's all important, but how do we map to the competencies? Yeah. And bluntly, if I have the competency, perhaps skip the course. In other words, let's make sure that we all are on that same page. So as I look around the world, this seems to be a trend. We had the honor of having Sir Ken Robinson at our conference that you spoke at. And Sir Ken and I agreed that not only is personalization going to be the key element, but we've got to get government leaders to understand that. We've got to understand the role that curation occurs. And finally, personalization is not about democracy. It's not a matter of letting everyone be exactly who they want to be in that sense, but it is honoring the ability of the learner or the organization or a designer to make some personalization decisions along the way.
I like the point about the need for governments to be involved here, and well, not the need, but how desirable it would be if they were involved. Guys, what do you think? We've got an election in the UK coming up in May. I think we should get in the ministers or shadow ministers from major parties responsible for adult skills and quiz them in this room about what they're planning to do about this.
I mean, I would be honest, I had an opportunity to meet with President Obama and with Secretary of State Clinton and some leaders from the other parties. And I keep saying, you can take what Peter Senge talked about the learning organization. We've got to go a bit farther. How do we create a learning culture, a learning society,
totally,
and the
totally.
like?
And I think if there's, we've seen a series of dramatically awful interventions and some good interventions in learning from government. It would be great to move from the idea of courses to the idea of promoting a learning society. All right, we've got a script here, but you know what? We've got so many questions coming in. We're going to get rid of that, and we're going to get down to the questions that you're asking. So the first one here.
One came from an Elliot.
Okay.
I actually like the Elliot.
He's going to jump the queue.
Hello, Elliot Revon. Will this session be recorded so I can pass this on to my colleagues who are unable to attend? Donald?
Yes, Elliot, the thing will be recorded, and yes, it will be live on Monday on YouTube, and we'll get the URL out on the Learning and Skills Group website straight away so that we can get that.
And Elliot, by the way, only has one T in his Elliot, but we accept all configurations.
Very particular about it in his own name. Now, look, Mike says, and there's 14 people who voted this question up to the top, given that almost anything we need to know can be instantly accessed from a phone or tablet, what is it that employees actually need to learn in the future? Where should organizations be focusing effort?
Well, I think one of the things we have to do in instructional and design or learning production is to accept the role that memorization is not the key. Familiarization and navigation and trust are more important than memorization. You know, if I go to a physician, I don't really care whether the physician understands and memorizes every pharmaceutical, every item. I actually would love them to have great judgment and then be able to combine their judgment with online data and access. Our dilemma is that instructional designers, in fact, much of the ADDIE model doesn't really embrace what the role of online assets are, or even for that matter, what collaborative learning might be.
Totally.
So I think that is going to be a critical one. I also think we've got to shape this concept of competency involving continual learning. You know, when I get confident, for instance, I think the saddest day is when people graduate at university and they walk across the stage and everyone says, it's over. Well, that depresses and scares me. It ought to just be beginning. I mean, any profession that we train in, maybe the half-life of knowledge is 4 years, in some it's 4 months. Yeah. So how do we view that we have to be able to continue to learn, not memorize, and certainly to be good at not only finding something, but then testing, is it true? Is it contextual relevant? And as I said, I think the learning field has to better understand the role of navigation in the process.
And I would agree with that. And I'd say, of course, at the end of all that, what you need to be doing is making sure that people are delivering. Are their behaviors changing in a way that suits their personal goals and the goals of the organization? So I think that's how we should be focusing our efforts, less on getting people to memorize things, although memory is very important, but more on how are we putting together the right learning for people, whether they do it themselves or whatever, to meet those competencies you're talking about.
And just to wrap up, Mike, you know, your question, I spent yesterday morning with about 35 global leaders of PwC here in London. And we talked a lot about how the learning strategies of organizations are going to have to embrace both personalization, embrace the concept of navigation, and then understand the role that performance support plays in that mix. And we're going to have to get it at the L&D level and also at the business level to understand that.
Totally, and I think performance support is so important, but of course, if we just focus on performance support, we're forgetting the fact that you can only perform if you have capability. So we need still to be providing people with the ability to build capability, provided, of course, that we don't think that has to happen necessarily in face-to-face courses. For those who aren't familiar with either Elliot or the acronym, Massive Open Online Course, which can be pronounced MOOC. Okay, so we've got a question here from, I don't know, who's it from? Saying, are they the way of the future, or are they a fad?
Yeah. Okay, it's a great word. Okay, MOOC. Now, I love the M, not because my last name is Masie, but because I think the critical element is how do we go massive? So I was just with some folks from Etihad Airline in Abu Dhabi. You know, how do you end up updating 20, 50, 70, 100,000 people about Ebola tonight?
Yeah.
Okay. So we've got to figure out a way to go massive. Online, we're already there. Open, I like that. But open, we've got to understand how do we mix public resources, behind the firewall resources, and the like. And for instance, we've seen the rise of TED videos as a critical element.
Sure.
I'm not sure the C, though, we understand.
No.
So does the C stand for course, credit, competency, compliance? I don't quite understand. Or is it community and collaboration? So I like to come out with MOOs more than MOOCs. Now, I think we take the MOO, and then we think about in the corporate environment, we're going to have to take the best of massive, open, online, and other elements. And when we're done, we have to rebrand it. Because Moo is like, or MOOC is, it's kind of like, you know, Second Life. Remember when we were all going to be in a virtual world? Well, guess what? We're doing Second Life now, except we're not avatars.
Yeah, we're real life Second Life.
In that process.
Okay, now I see MOOCs as being the first stage in an evolving world of online provision. Do you think in the future we'll have enterprises going out and picking from a smorgasbord? I'm going to do a bit of leadership from Harvard, something on how to do, I don't know, marketing from a college in Singapore, and maybe there's an expert somewhere in England who's teaching me something else.
Yeah, I think they are, but understand that the MOOC, as it's currently being done, and I've taken 5, I've led 5, we've done a big world seminar on them, they still don't have a lot of personalization. A lot of the MOOC is still follow the leaders. You know, now it's at a ratio of maybe 80,000 learners and 1 leader. So I love the idea of make it massive, make it open, make it online, take it from different resources, but let's wrap it together in something that I think has a bit more corporate ready structure and also ends up understanding that what the outcome is. Is it a certificate? Is it a badge? Is it a competency? Is it readiness?
And if the aim is, I think it should be, how is this improving your effectiveness in the workplace? Let's not, as we've always done in the past with other courses, just assume that the course is enough. It never is. How are we going to track people's actual behavior, what they're doing in the workplace as a result of that?
And I think the phrase "moo" is like a really good one. So I like.
Thank you for adding that to our Friday morning. Or of course, you may be watching this in a recording, so wherever you are in the world and whatever time it is. Great question from Tim. I think we should look at this every December when all the stuff about trends is coming out. Tim says, what are the white elephants, red herrings, and other things that we'll be looking back on in 5 years' time? They're hip now, and in 5 years' time, we'll look back and we'll cringe.
Yeah, well, I don't know if we'll cringe or we'll have some fun. It's, you know, when these smartphones came out, I was all excited because I could put my finger on a glass and it worked, and I could make a phone call. I never thought it would become my GPS. So I'm not sure they become white herrings. I think what they become is we get developmental beyond that. But I'll give you a few that I'm intrigued with, but not quite sure how they're going to play out. Okay. I am very intrigued with what wearables are. I will be one of the first people with the Apple Watch in a few weeks. I've got my own drone that can fly around, and I'm trying to avoid airspace.
And tell them about the car as well.
And yes, I did buy, and it was finalized in production this morning, a red Tesla, okay, an all-electric car. Now, each of these, we can take the drones, the wearables, you know, the electric car. I'm attracted to each of them because they are inventions that are provocative and potentially disruptive. But the nature of those doesn't mean that they necessarily will become the thing. So I had, and we did the testing on the first Segways. Okay, we did the usability testing. I've got 3 of them that I never use in my garage now. So what I think, though, if I will tell you where I think, ironically, something that's in deep doo-doo is the LMS. Okay? The learning management system, and it's not because the LMS is bad. It's just that the LMSs, to me, seem old. You know, that all the things we want them to do are harder for them to do. And so I think what we're going to see is a repackaging of the LMS to be ready for learning apps, personalization, to really be mapping everything that a learner does, not just the structured courses that they go to. And by the way, I don't think it's the fault of the LMS companies. I think we've got to evolve our view of what the underlying enterprise technologies will be.
And possibly evolve our nature of our view of what the nature of learning is. And I think that has happened with the internet, and perhaps we've gone further than we can get from some of the tools we have in place at the moment.
Now we've got Don talking about learning. So why don't you give me that question?
Which question is this?
This one.
Okay, so Con is...
Con, not Don. Con, not Don. I'm sorry.
Con is in Australia. I'm guessing you are, Con. That's where you normally are. It says, a recent ATD State of Industry report reveals that M-learning take-up has not been, and it's just dropped out of sight here, I can't see it, but I think the question said it's not been as good as we'd expected.
Okay. I don't like the phrase M-learning.
Neither do I. Why not?
I've never liked it, you know, because, do we do
P-learning.
P-learning or notepad learning and the like. Look, there are three things that I think are true. We are, in fact, more and more using mobile devices. They are part of our world, and we use them to access information, to do a search. I probably do 13, 15 searches a day when a trigger is on that. We certainly are using them more and more for collaboration, whether it be a text message or the like. And I believe that it will increasingly be used for performance support. Where M-learning got confused was that we were going to take this course that worked really well on a desktop, and we were going to shrink it down to 3-point violet type and shove it into the device. It doesn't work. What I think we have to do is we have to become mobility ready. We have to become BYOD ready, which means that no matter where somebody is, their device gets appropriate safe access to behind the firewall content. And then I think we have to ask, how does the mobile device assist me without becoming the focus? You know, I don't want people walking around looking at their mobile devices. I want them to be interactive with each other and have this tell me and give me what I need. And increasingly, we believe with wearables and the like, we might not be looking down on that, but we may be seeing it, hearing it, or getting input in a different way. But I think M-learning has been one of the overstated, everybody clicks it off on an RFP and the like, but then you go around to our 230 companies and you ask them for mobile learning examples and the room gets quiet. Now, every sponsor, every supplier has to have an M-learning, you know, a tick box in that. But I think we've got a disconnect. And I think some of it is of the hype cycle. And some of it is that we haven't done the creative work yet to figure out what devices could do for us.
And I'll tell you something else that's happening here. The reason I dislike the phrase is that M-learning is M-delivery. People learn, devices don't. I think that's something which we need to establish. But there's something else as well. M-learning not succeeding is a nonsense. You do your search 10 to 15 times a day. If you look at the Rudder Fin Intendant Index, why people go online, they go online mostly out of 7 categories to learn. So what's happening? Well, what's happening is people are using their mobile devices to learn. They're just not doing it through courses supplied by the training department.
Now, I will tell you, and I made it before, and I said it may be a truly major innovation, it may be a bit of a problem. I would watch carefully what happens with digital wearable watches. We've been doing some early work with Apple and others, and you're going to see the first wave being in the health area. So somebody has diabetes or somebody is in a different environment, and this connects with sensors that might give me body bio or other elements. But I also get really intrigued with, you know, could my watch give me some data as how well am I collaborating in the organization? You know, am I meeting with a variety of people there? How often did I say the word no during the day? Now, we can get into some truly interesting,
scary stuff.
You may know my friend Marshall Goldsmith. He's one of the most well-known coaches in the world. Well, Marshall, every time I'm with him and I say the word no, I've got to put $20 down, you know, because he thinks it's one of the most defeating questions. So when I get together with him, I put 200 on the table, and then I just sort of go down there. But I would take a look at what wearables may do as a way of giving a big data, a small data perspective back to the learner and the like.
I'm slightly scared about that though, Elliot, the idea that so much can be tracked and we can be observed so much. Is there a risk of us?
Now, the words you're saying are not sophisticated. No, it is. I mean, we're moving into some brand new zones. I mean, my drones are fascinating. My drone, I have this thing, it can go up in the sky, it can fly around, it does 3G. So I had to decide, do I have the right to look at my neighbor's yard? Well, I do. But do I have the right to go over the fence to look at a neighbor's yard? Probably not. Now, I'm playing with a drone, I'm playing with a 3D printer, I'm playing with a wearable watch, not because I think that's the future, but I think there's an innovative element. And I think more and more of us in the learning and development area have to have a lab mentality.
I think we absolutely need to be playing with things all the time, whether it's playing with the technology or playing with how we interact with people through the technology probably more important. We're coming up,
we only have 9.5 minutes
looking
left.
at my analog watch. Let's answer the question really fast with some short snappy things. Marco is saying personalisation is great, but how do we scale that in the enterprise? It's the old conundrum.
Well, I would tell you one of the biggest areas of personalization is who does it. I would argue that most personalization is initially done by the learner.
Sure.
Imagine if you were able to move some slides back and forth. Eventually, we're not there yet. We think that machine intelligence will, in fact, give us some guidance around that. But some of it is, look, if I get 3% personalization, I go, ooh, ah. We're not talking about 99% yet. So it's really about calibration initially.
And setting it with realistic expectation, things aren't going to be tailored exactly for everybody. I think that's fair
What's this one down here from Andrew?
Is there a good way to start more collaborative learning in the workplace? With busy workloads, how do you encourage people to actually, well, it's interesting, Andrew's point is to encourage group activities as an extension of classroom training.
I love it, Andrew, I love it. One of the, almost like M-learning, one of the phrases I don't particularly embrace is social learning.
Right.
Now, it's funny because I'm social and I'm collaborative.
And you learn.
But I learn. But what I found is if I put 25 people into a SharePoint site, they all fall asleep. It's the most abandoned digital platform in the world. Because people, when they get together to learn, need a little bit of a structure, a little bit of an element of trust. So we try to distinguish away from socialization, which I think is great. I can be a Yammer and Jive or Google Hangouts, and I can socialize. Now, collaboration, particularly as integrated to an outcome of a learning activity, generally doesn't happen without some degree of facilitation or mediation in that process. And we've done a little bit, I think, naive view. Oh, this is a wonderful program. Now you go to the bulletin board and chat. What we found is who goes to the bulletin board a lot? The angry, the annoyed, and the leaving. What we have to figure out is how do we mediate collaboration and that goes back to learning and development competency. That I think this has to become part of. We've been talking about the 21st century L&D person.
Exactly.
Understanding how to facilitate and mediate collaboration.
And a lot of that means letting go and establishing that actually, firstly, a single activity isn't going to be the result. It isn't going to cure everything. And secondly, that we're not going to be able to control everybody's learning, but we can put them, and this is, I think, the role of the 21st century learning professional, put people in a position whereby they are learning, because we've set up that environment for them without necessarily it being apparent.
And I love that phrase. You should watch the Disney movie and just hear the song "Let It Go," because I think a lot of what we have to do is, as learning professionals, let it go, let it, because the learner will naturally do well if we don't over-engineer their process, while at the same time
providing
a high level of feedback and accountability.
Okay. When we record this, we'll have a little bouncing ball on the lyrics, Let It Go. Too many questions to answer. I'm just going to jump to ones which are catching my eye. Here's an interesting one from Laura van den Olden. How do you stimulate the older generation, just put older in quotes, to learn online? People of 30 years and younger go to their smartphones naturally. It's a natural extension in learning.
Well, look, I'm 64. I'm going to be 65 in May. Ironically, the data indicates that people of an older generation actually are one of the highest levels of going online. It's not their self-concept as much. They often want a higher degree of sort of a simulated, or drop-down work environment. I think what we need to do is simplification. And by the way, this is not just for the older people in our workforce. I think very often we're feature exhaustive. Like you go to Excel. Most people know how to do 3 things in Excel, but there are 1,900 features there. So I actually think we've worked with AARP, a group that focuses on seniors in the United States, of how do we get more, a kind of personalized front end. So I pick up my phone and it goes, collaborate, and I've got the 10 pictures of good people, and I can do that rather than have to make my way through 114 app pictures there.
And I think that, as you say, Elliot, my father's online all the time. He's 90, I'm 50 something. I'm convinced it's more a matter of providing the right stimulating environment for people and also, as with all learners, the ability to fail safely. Put in that position, I think you're going to be in a good starting point. All right, context. If it's the most important point of L&D, what does this do to the value of the L&D business that's not part, sorry, Andrew, a question for Andrew Jacobs, and I'll do my best to actually read it properly, Andrew. If context is the most important element of L&D activity now, what does this do to the value of L&D function that's not part of the business?
Well, I think part of what we have to understand is that people don't remember the PowerPoint slides that you present. What do they remember? They remember the stories.
Yep.
They remember the backstory. They remember the context. They remember the warning. So what I think we need to do is we need to shift. I personally think that content, that HQ headquarter content, should become a smaller bit, and where possible asynchronous. Then I think we should increase context and field experience with what people are actually doing in the field. And I think ultimately it's the magic is in the mix of these elements. And that's really what the business wants.
And Andrew, I would question, is there any part, or should there be any part of the L&D function that is not part of the business? Perhaps not. Perhaps if it isn't part of the business, it shouldn't be doing anything. We've got 2 minutes left.
Oh my gosh, I'm stressed.
I know. The tension in the studio, the DreamTech studio, is palpable. With the growing proliferation, asked David Lemon, of short-form learning, Twitter, social media, quick replies, are we running the risk of losing the ability to reflect and strategize? Great question.
Well, we are if we're afraid to then take that short bit and ask a reflective and strategizing question. I actually think that far too often in learning, we ask simple recall questions. So you show a little video and is the answer A or B, rather than saying, what's the implication of A and B?
Yeah.
How might we use it? So I actually believe that we need to become more courageous, more stretching. I actually even think we have to allow our learners to fail a few times on assessment.
Totally.
Because a video game, you'll never play it a second time if you get the gold ring the first time. So I think that we need to reshift how we process short content with greater challenges that builds curiosity, that builds the reflection that you're talking about.
It's a very good point. And I would add something to that. Sometimes we need those short answers, but sometimes also an accumulation of short answers, of insights, of facts here and there, thanks to the marvel of the human brain, is coagulated and brought together into a coherent whole. Computers can analyze, but only our brains can really synthesize and bring things together.
Don, let me cheat us in the end with one final thought as I head out here. It is enormously important for us also to understand that global is changing. For a while, global was, let's take something done in the UK or the US and let's make sure we send it everywhere. I'm excited about getting from Burma the content developed by instructional or content management experts in Burma. I'm excited to honor the difference in how learning is done in Brazil or in Shanghai. So I really believe that what we as an L&D field need to do is a deeper understanding and appreciation that how we learn changes by culture, it changes by regional context, and rather than try to homogenize it into one, vanilla glob, I think what we need to do is to honor the universal differences, because global organizations work when they're made up of people who operate from a different cultural experience.
And that diversity is, and should be, a source of strength rather than of concern. That's a really good point to end on, Elliot, as we unfortunately have to wrap up now.
Yeah, my watch says that you went 22 seconds long.
I'm notorious for being prolix and unable to control myself. I am delighted to have been sharing this half hour with Elliot. We haven't been able to answer all the questions. I'm going to put those up on the LSG website, and we'll hopefully get some discussion around them.
And by the way, if any of you are like theater, I am also a Broadway producer. Soon we'll have Kinky Boots, one of our shows here in London, and we're going to Paris to open American in Paris, a wonderful Gershwin musical there. So a little side plug.
Because of course he isn't busy enough doing everything else that he does. So look, guys, thanks very much for joining us either live or in the recording, and I look forward to seeing you at the next Learning and Skills Group
And I checked his credentials.
I am who I say I am. And if not, then I'm looking forward to seeing you in January at the Learning Technologies Exhibition and Conference, which is the 28th, 29th January in London. Bye for now.
Bye now.